There we go. Welcome, everybody, and happy holidays from Foreword Reviews and Bowker. I'm with Danielle Valentine, our editor, managing editor of the editing service at Foreword Reviews, and we're both really pleased that Bowker has partnered with us to share some tips about editing, as well as we do a webinar with them on why trade reviews matter. And I think that they've posted those live recordings on their website as well. Just a bit of information about Danielle and I. We are 25 years old, Foreword is, and Danielle joined us about almost 4 years ago.
Yep, 4 years in March.
She has graduated, as you can see, with an English language and literature degree. She moved to New York City, worked for one of the bigger houses, and then came back to Michigan, where she was a freelance editor until she joined us in 2019. And she's the star of the show, but very quickly, I founded the magazine about 25 years ago. It'll be 25 years, April 1st, 2023. So we have a big celebration happening next year. But our goal was to provide an opportunity for independent presses to have access to the same marketing services and reviews that the larger houses were getting from bigger trade magazines that had been around for 50, 60, 100 years or so. And that's all we do is exclusively indie presses. And our mission is to discover great books from diverse voices and showcase those books to our readers, who are primarily librarians and booksellers across the country. One of the things that we came across in the last 5 years or so is that so many of the books that indie presses were putting together were not as well edited as they should be. And realizing that that was a super important part of the processes, we thought maybe we could put a little program together to expressly show, outline why it's so important and how it will increase your chances of getting reviews in a publication like ours. So some of the things we're going to cover today are why you should hire an editor, some common mistakes that Danielle sees, the types of editing that you can hire for, some proofreading tips, some samples of some editing projects that she's been working on, and also some things to consider when you are hiring an editor. So with that, I'm going to erase my sun-filled screen here and let Danielle take over for the rest of the program. And I'll let you take it away. Thank you.
All righty. All right, I am recovering from the flu, so y'all might have to bear with me a little bit. Let me know if you need me to repeat anything. All right, so starting off with why hire an editor. First of all, editors are aware of industry standards and may have access to resources authors do not. Primarily, that's things like what style guides are going to need to be used, what dictionaries editors and publishers and whatnot prefer. And I know I have access to, which I pay for, it's a paid subscription to the Chicago Manual of Style online. Has some great options. There's forums and you can ask questions of the experts and things like that, but it is paid. And that's something that an editor might have, and that saves you the trouble of having to buy it yourself. A fresh set of eyes is always good. I think we've all, gone through something and you read it 100 times and you're sure it's perfect. And then there's something wrong with it. And you're like, how did I miss that? You get over familiar. And so it's always good to have a fresh set of eyes, especially professional eyes, to give some objectivity and a new perspective. Editing software has its limits. I know we've all seen that. There's that squiggly little red line and you're like, I don't know what you're trying to tell me. Or it's giving you a suggestion that you're sure is wrong. It doesn't pick up on things like the word is correct, but it's not the word you're looking for. Things like that you really need a person at the end to have a look at and confirm or deny. And it can also give you more confidence when submitting your work, just knowing that someone else has looked over it, someone else has given it the stamp of approval, can put you in a better position going forward, either to self-publish or to submit to traditional publishing avenues. Some common mistakes. We get a lot of inconsistent verb tenses. You may start in past and shift to present. That's something that a lot of times when you're reading it, especially just sort of writing as you go, you left it in past tense on Monday and you come back on Wednesday and you're feeling present, but that's not going to work for the whole thing. We get a lot of missing, additional, or repeated words. I think a lot of these things sort of happen when you go back and revise maybe a portion of a sentence or something like that and forget to adapt the entire thing. Incorrect subject-verb agreements, whether or not there's an S on the end. That one is very, very common. Costume changes is sort of just what I use to refer to really anything that suddenly or magically appears or disappears in a scene. I've seen characters just spontaneously are now in the room and they were previously somewhere else. I have actually seen full, like the outfit change. It's very, make it pink, make it blue. Incorrect, inconsistent capitalization. This is sort of the question of, is it or is it not a proper noun? And that can get kind of tricky, especially when in some cases it is and in some cases it isn't. And that's when knowing, what dictionaries publishing in general prefers Webster's dictionary. But if you don't know that, you might not necessarily know what the preferred capitalization or hyphenation or things like that are for something. And then dialogue and paragraph formatting. This is probably the most common. I don't know if I've ever gotten a manuscript that there isn't something involving this in there. Either they need to change to a new paragraph and they haven't, or the end punctuation is outside the quotation marks, the semicolon when that's not really what you mean, things like that. All right, we're going to talk a little bit about the different types of editing. This is by no means an all-inclusive list, but this is sort of just some of the buzzword types of editing. So we have a developmental edit, a copy edit, and proofreading, which we are going to break down a bit in the subsequent slides. All right, we're going to start with developmental editing. This is big picture editing. It's going to do narrative structure, pacing, reader satisfaction, plot continuity, any sort of global issue. For this sort of edit, it's the sooner the better, because you need to be open. That the biggest thing with a developmental edit is you want to do it at a stage where you as an author are still open to making these big picture changes. I know I personally have recommended some rather large scale, essentially requires a full rewrite kind of changes. So if you're not open to that, maybe skip the developmental edit. And it's very important at this stage because you are talking about these big picture things and a lot might be changing to have good communication and good collaboration. It's not really the kind of thing that you can just do and a one-off and then you go and, okay, I will make all of those changes. And now I am sure that it's perfect and all of those changes have been made. There's going to be some back and forth. And we include that in all of our types of edits, but it's most important, I would say, in the developmental edit that you pay for it, you pay for your developmental edit, and we will go through as many rounds of editing as is reasonable or useful for you. Then we have copy editing. This is probably the most common form of editing. Like when you think I'm going to get something edited, this is probably what you're thinking of. It's grammar, spelling, punctuation, consistent style and formatting. That's going to be things like if the font face changes or if, say, all of the headings are bold and then suddenly they're not, things like that. It can include line editing. That's a conversation you'll want to have with your editor as far as what they do or do not include in a copy edit. And line editing is, well, it's essentially editing line by line. Things like word choice, syntax, overall sentence flow. And this is something you want to do sort of in the final-ish stages. Probably not immediately, like check off the copy edit, then I hit publish. But you want a polished final draft. You're like, I've taken this as far as I can take it, and now I need someone to go through and find those like nitty-gritty nuts and bolts kinds of things. Proofreading. We do not offer proofreading as a separate service. You can get people who specialize specifically in proofreading. If you go through a traditional publishing avenue, this will likely be included. This is the final step. This is usually done after internal formatting, and it checks for things. I think we've all, or maybe a lot of us, have tried to put an image into Microsoft Word, and it's suddenly, it's like the House of Usher. Like it's a mess. So this is good for making sure the end of line is in the right place. There are actually specific places you are allowed to break words at the end of a line, making sure all of those are correct, making sure nothing's gotten moved around. A lot of times italics, bold, things like that don't get carried over. Sometimes once you've done formatting, checking for things like that. This is going to be strictly mechanical. They're not going to look at anything else. If something just straight up doesn't make sense, so long as it's not a grammar problem, proofreading is not going to mention it. It's very right or wrong, no creative input, but it is still important, especially if you're going through any kind of interior formatting or putting any images or graphs or anything like that. You do want to do that final run through just to make sure everything is still in the right place. So for the proofreading process, because this is something that you can probably do on your own, I mean, you might not want to, but you theoretically could. It's easier certainly than the other ones. You want to take your time, definitely. You're going to have to do this multiple times. You're not going to catch everything on the first try, so don't even attempt it. Reading the manuscript out loud can be very helpful if you're trying to, oh, this just doesn't flow properly, or okay, what happened here? Reading it out loud slows it down, and it, just very scientifically, it's sort of pinging off different places in your brain. So that can be very useful. You want to do it in sections. It doesn't matter how short your manuscript is. I don't care if you have a children's book. Just don't try and sit down, do it through all at once and call it a day. It is a surprisingly taxing process doing this. So just take your time, do it in sections, and highlight common errors. If you are aware that, I struggle with my verb tenses or my subject verb agreements or things like that, look for those. Maybe do a run through specifically just for that. Are all of my periods in the right place? Just look at that, and then have another run through for something else. But just sort of accepting and knowing your shortcomings can be very useful for this sort of thing. All right, here we have a few samples. These in particular, because we work on Chromebooks, are taken from Google Docs, and Google Docs calls it suggestions. You might be more familiar with the Microsoft Word version, which is track changes. I'm not aware of what they call it in Pages, but I'm sure they have something. So that's what this looks like for us. These are just some examples of the sort of changes that we might be making. Obviously, we've blurred out the actual text because that's someone else's manuscript, but you can just sort of see what this is going to look like, the kind of changes we might make. These are more copy editing, sort of, not a lot of developmental stuff happening here. But this is one example of the kind of thing you would get back from us. And then we have another one, and here that top comment there is more in a developmental vein, I suppose. It's making a more creative, objective, or subjective rather, suggestion. But again, you can sort of see what this would look like. The highlighting on the bottom there, you click on that and then the comment pops up. This is Google Docs. Again, as I said, track changes works more or less the same way. Not super familiar with Pages, but they all kind of end up looking like this. And this is what the document would look like when you got it back from us. We're going to talk a little bit in just a second about sort of the conversations you want to have with your editor about how you are getting your changes back. And things to consider when hiring an editor. Do they have experience? And more than that, do they have the kind of experience that you want? If you are looking for someone who is familiar with your particular genre, ask that question. Look for that person specifically. You want to know if they're going to use a style guide, and if so, which one. In order to do that, you need to know which one your manuscript requires. Generally speaking, across the publishing industry, for fiction or literary nonfiction, being like a memoir type thing, it's going to be Chicago style. If you're writing more of an academic medical kind of thing, that might be an AMA. History does a lot of APA, things like that. You're going to want to know the style guide that the publisher you're going through is using, or the journal you're submitting to or something, and then make sure that your editor is using that style guide. You're going to want to know what sort of technology they use. As I was saying, we have Google Docs, we work on Chromebooks, but we will use whatever format you submit the manuscript in. But you want to have that conversation with your editor, because you don't want to get a file back that you can't open because it's in a different format or using a different processor that you don't have access to or you're not familiar with. You want to know how they're going to deliver feedback. Are they going to use track changes features or suggestions or whatever version you have of that? Or are they just going to go through and change it? Are they going to give you some kind of summary? Are they going to do both? You want to have that conversation so you don't get something back and either you wanted it all incorporated or maybe you didn't. You want to make sure you know ahead of time how that process is going to happen. And if you both have the technology and the resources and just the know-how to do that. And then how will they determine what type of edit is needed? If you want sort of like a sample, send it over, they give you their opinion, whatever, is that something they do? Do you want to look for someone who does that? We offer a sample chapter edit that is paid, but then also if you were to just send in however much you wanted to send in, we would take a look at it and give you some recommendations on what type of edit we think would be beneficial based on the stage you're at or whatnot. And then obviously you want to talk about how much is it going to cost and how do they calculate that? Is it by the character, by the word, page count? Like what is it? And it's really all across the board. People do it all sorts of different ways. Ours is by the word, but you want to make sure you know upfront, and then you calculate it yourself and you agree on that and whatnot before you get into the actual editing process. Okay. You're muted still, Victoria.
Thank you for letting me know. I'll jump in and speak a little bit about our editing service, which we started, as I mentioned, in 2019. We did this because we were seeing so many more books come in for review, which we try to cover as much as we can. But one of the reasons that we say no to a review right away is because the editing looks like it hasn't been done by a professional. And so I just want to give you a heads up that that is actually happening at review publications. Unfortunately, our job and that librarians and booksellers trust us to do is to make sure that we're providing them good information in the way of a review about books that are good. And if we are recommending books that have poor editing, it's not only a loss of our reputation and good standards, but it makes the rest of the industry look bad too. So it's just another way for us to help publishers get to a level playing field with the larger houses who are offering these services as part of their publishing packages. Bowker asked us to help them out with they were getting a lot of questions from their customers about editing. And so they reached out to us and said, if you had a service, we would like to partner with you on that. And so we also thought we could do it with some competitive pricing, which is why we started this service. If you go to our website, we're not recommending that you go, you're getting an offer at the end of this session today for 10% off through Bowker, but this is kind of what you'll see, how you can see automatically what the pricing is if you stick the words in the cost for, because we do it by the word. But this will give you an idea of what you can expect in terms of spelling errors, the plot, pacing and tension with a developmental, and what you would get for just copy editing and how long it will take. As Danielle, we have a couple questions that I want to get into first, but everybody can read kind of the summary on their own about what we covered today. Danielle, one of the questions was if we have technical and foreign words and phrases. I didn't know the answer to this. I mean, somebody said that they were writing a biblical book with a lot of Hebrew and Latin in it, and I knew for sure that they would have to find somebody who specialized in this, and it was definitely worth getting an edit done on a project like that. But I don't know about technical and foreign words. Is that something in our purview, or would you get somebody who specialized in that, or what is your recommendation?
I guess sort of the way that the question's being asked suggests to me that it's just sort of like here and there. Obviously the odd here and there word, I think we're all familiar with the odd technical or foreign word or phrase, a lot of those are actually in the dictionary. And fun fact, once it's in the dictionary, you don't have to italicize it anymore. But yeah, that's certainly something, so long as there aren't like large sections written in French, something to say quoted from French would be fine. But if you're looking for editing on foreign language excerpts, so what I mean is like you want those portions actually edited as opposed to say just pulling from a French text where you want it displayed exactly the way you're quoting it from. If you want any sort of editing in any sort of foreign language, obviously get someone, maybe even just for those sections, but definitely don't attempt to ever put something in a foreign language if you don't have someone who is a fluent speaker of that foreign language taking a second look at it for you. And also don't get anything tattooed on your body if you haven't done the same thing. That's not a voice of experience, just really good advice.
Mr. Hill asked about our direct contact information, and I wanted to answer his first question live. He said he tried to register through Bowker a few weeks ago and had trouble. Well, we have sorted through some of the issues we were having with Bowker, and it turns out larger projects were causing a error on their side. And so we think that we've sorted through all of those, but if we haven't and you are running into problems, please contact Danielle or I, because we do not want your editing projects sitting in the ether world waiting to be taken care of. But we did have a coding problem, and we think we've sorted that out. Somebody also asked, do we guarantee our work 100% perfection? We absolutely do not. We are imperfect, and we do the best we can. And you have to trust that, you know, I just don't know how to better answer that. We have the talent to do a great editing job, and we wouldn't provide the service if we didn't. But it may not be perfect ever. So
I think another problem with that is sort of a lot of it's subjective. If you get a developmental edit from one person versus another person, there will be some overlap, I would like to think, but it's not going to be the same recommendations. So and then for that matter, when you go to submit it, whoever you're submitting it to is going to have their own preferences. So to say that, you know, it's possible for anyone to give you something that no one is going to have any sort of problem with, it's just not. We're human and we make mistakes and we all have opinions. So it's just not really possible.
Somebody else is asking about endnotes and photo captions. Their genre is biography. I believe we do edit those. I'm not sure about fact checking.
Fact checking, it would sort of, I mean, in the nature of a biography, you know, I would hope that whoever's writing a biography knows more about the subject than an editor would necessarily need to. We'll do sort of some cursory fact checking. I've looked up some very strange things just to be sure, some spellings of things, geographic locations, those sorts of things. But in general, you probably want to make sure that you have most of the facts correct, especially if you're talking about something like a biography or a scientific text or something like that. Because we're not necessarily going to have like subject expertise in the very specific thing that you're talking about.
Somebody asked about the deadline being 10% off now through December 26th, and their books are not going to be ready until next year. We run this editing webinar 5 or 6 times a year with Bowker. So keep checking back on their website to see if you can take advantage, or email Danielle and I privately, and we will give you the last discount code that they gave us and make it happen for you. That's the best I can do.
Okay. I just got the questions open, so I'm just going to kind of flip through a couple of them.
Okay, go ahead.
All right. Lynn is asking, if we aren't ready for editing, can we purchase the discounted service to use later? The issue with that is that we do it by the word. So if that word count were to change, then yeah, we need sort of whatever you want edited, that needs to be what is presented when you purchase it, because that's how we're going to calculate cost. And then with the deadlines and things like that, like it's going to enter the system and then it's going to be there, and we can't just disappear it. That clock's going to be ticking as soon as you hit purchase or whatever the button says. Norman is asking sort of how an editor would respond to excerpts in a foreign language. Probably check that they're spelled. I know I always check if it's spelled correctly, especially if it doesn't look right. That's usually just me running it through Google Translate unless I am vaguely familiar with the language or the verbiage that's being used. But yeah, mostly they would just skip over it, and there might be a note. We also include summary comments in both a copy edit and developmental edit. If it was the sort of thing that the editor was like, this is over my head, that's something that would be included, like make sure to double check the whatever because that was over my head. Or at least that's how I would do it. That's how we would encourage our editors to handle it. Whatever editor you got, I can't speak to how they would respond to it, but that is what I would like to think would be the industry standard. Eddie's asking if our manuscripts or if the edits are print ready, and about covers. We do not include book covers. We have a graphic designer for us, but we don't produce book covers. I would like to think our edits, when it comes through a copy edit, are print ready more or less. We do have comments that we'll include that need to be addressed by the author. A developmental edit, of course, there should be some back and forth. There's going to be some bigger changes that need to be made. So it's not necessarily going to like come past our email like, okay, done, and it's totally ready to print. There will almost certainly be things that need to be addressed or considered on the other end before it's fully print ready. But no, we don't do any sort of interior formatting. That requires some specialized software if you're going to get it done. You can also do it yourself. There's a lot of great programs out there that will let you do that yourself, but they are, again, predominantly paid subscriptions. We don't do that right now. A lot of publishing services, more traditional routes, or a lot of these online full service things will include interior formatting, but we don't do that.
Danielle, I wonder if he was asking if you would proofread the covers or copy edit the covers.
We would proofread the cover copy if you had it. Cover copy, I mean the words on it. Anything that's sort of given to us as an image, we can't really work with. You can't really pull a word count off of it, for one thing, and you can't make edits directly on it. But I've had people copy and paste essentially the words that are going to go on there about the author or the back cover or things like that, and we will edit that so long as it's given to us as just straight words.
Norman's asking about St. Paul.
Oh,
style say, spell it out.
It doesn't necessarily, that's when quoting a biblical character, presumably you are then quoting a Bible verse, and then you would defer to specifically citing the Bible verse. You would probably say, St. Paul says, or Paul, or depending on when in his journey we're talking about him, but you would probably just to specify who you're talking about, as St. Paul says, or St. Paul, the same way you would do it if it was not a biblical character, just you were talking about any person, you'd want to specify who was speaking. But if you then go on to quote a Bible verse, you will have to cite that Bible verse in whatever style guide you're using at the in text or footnote or however. You'd have to do both. Let's see. Can we proof from a PDF? No, we can't, because you can't. PDF stands for portable document file. It is essentially intended to be uneditable. That's why it's used for like renewing your lease or things like that. You can't edit the text. You can't pull it out. You can't make the sorts of changes and whatnot that we want to make. So no, we cannot edit from a PDF. You could pull the text out of that PDF, and then we could edit that, but we need a working file.
Dave is asking about getting his book published and promoted. We do not offer those services.
No.
And one more, just some clarification from Norman. I think you should check that out. And then that will be our last question. We'll encourage everybody to check us out online or send us an email directly.
Yeah, I think I already answered that one.
Okay, great. Well, we really appreciate everybody, and we know that it's probably during your lunch hour and ate up some of your precious private time at your job. We appreciate you. We're here to answer questions. We wish you a happy holiday and happy new year, and look forward to working with you. Thank you.